Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today to tuning up the board and senior executive partnership. See, I'm really glad Mike didn't steal that one earlier. This topic in particular was directly informed by many responses from our workshop participants that expressed that they would like to shift or improve some certain practices in their organization, either as a board member or a CEO/ED. But of course, organizational change is a group effort. So hopefully today we can address some questions and learn from your experiences and reflections on some of the challenges in the working relationship between the board and senior executive, or some of the ambiguities and ways it goes well. My name is Liz Tang. I use the pronoun she, her, and I am the education coordinator for Integral.org. I'll be around to host and I'll be reading the chat and doing any sort of technology support. So without further ado, let's go on to our land acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge that Integral.org is based out of Mohkinstsis, which is the Blackfoot name for elbow. And this refers to the confluence of Elbow and Bow rivers that run through the Treaty 7 territory. Um, Mohkinstsis is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, consisting of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, District 5, which is Calgary Nose Hill, and District 6, which is Calgary Elbow. And at Integral.org, our team recognizes that sometimes there exists a tension between the legal and governance structures that we work within, and that our efforts towards truth and reconciliation. So we do accept that responsibility to work towards reconciling that tension. And we all have that connection and responsibility to the lands that host our lives and our communities and our work. So some housekeeping notes on today's virtual session. As I mentioned before, we hope today's session will kind of include a level of back and forth. And thank you to those who have already sent in some comments through the registration. We'll be addressing and peppering those throughout today's content today, but we'll have some polls, some questions, and a little bit of a discussion. So if you do have any other scenarios and comments, please do leave them in the chat box. And as always, the recording and the slides and the other resources will be available after today's session. So I'm very happy to introduce today's facilitator. This is Mike Grogan. He is the president and CEO of Integral.org. And Integral.org, if you're not already aware, is a nonprofit charity. So he's navigating that board CEO relationship every day, like many of you, as well as with the many nonprofit boards that we work with. So from board governance to strategy development and sustainability planning, Mike has over 30 years of experience where he's recognized for his ability to inspire nonprofit organizations to tackle complex issues and create impactful and lasting solutions. So thank you for joining us today. And Mike, you can take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Great start as always. And thank you all for joining us. Really looking forward to this. This is the first time we've done this webinar. And so, thanks for being, guinea pigs and helping us figure it all out. But it really is. This does, as Liz said, this came from a lot of the comments before. And when we did other workshops and sort of introduction to governance or some of our challenges of governance stuff, is that what about this relationship? But I think it's probably for many organizations, and no matter what stage of life you're at, but just it's such a critical relationship. And certainly this is in no way meant to be, here's all the right way to do things. We'll talk about theory and we'll talk about practice. We'll talk about the reality. But at the end of the day, this is a relationship, and it's a relationship that, like all others, sort of goes through ebbs and flows and ups and downs, but it's a very peculiar relationship. So really hoping that that when we throw some ideas out there today, that you lend your voice to this. I can talk forever, often I do, but I'd rather not today. But to hear what your questions are, your thoughts. There's a lot of folks that I'm not sure who's in the wait or here yet, but I mean, I looked through the registration list, lots of folks who worked in this sector a long time, people who are on boards and have sort of worked with executives or CEOs, people who are the senior executive in an organization. So great to figure that out. There's no right or one right or wrong answer. There's all kinds of stuff we put to a jigsaw puzzle here, and let's see what we come up with. Most back and forth here. There we go. We're going to sort of talk about some of the theory. Like there is lots of theory out there. The board shall govern and managers shall manage and execute. We'll talk about what that kind of looks like in general terms to lay the lay of the land. We'll talk about some of the challenges that go with that, perhaps. It's just, where that works well, where it falls short, and then what people have done to sort of navigate this relationship. And I've got a number of board chairs that I've worked with over my years, and sometimes, or boards I've worked with too in different ways. And both being on the board and being a staff person, there's different ways of navigating that. So we'll talk about that and just some resources at the end where you can go for help and all that kind of stuff. And this is really just a conversation we're going to have about this very fundamental relationship that we have inside a lot of our nonprofits. And as Liz said, there's lots of questions come up. If there's more there, by all means, throw them out there. Put your hand up. Liz will watch for that. Put it in the chat. The more that comes from you, the better this whole thing is, I think. Maybe we'll start with a poll though, Liz. Why don't you walk us through the first poll and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so our first poll, we just kind of, we know nonprofits take many sizes and shapes. So we're curious if you have a single senior executive, also could be a CEO, an ED, but do you have one person in that role or multiple? Yeah, you're seeing some results go in. Are there any other different names for the senior executive, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that because it
Yeah.
saves us fun in this answer. And even one of the questions that came in advance is that, somebody locating their question within their work of operations in a kind of human service kind of area, but there's different ones. So we can talk about some of those terminology. Sometimes you'll hear in arts organizations, you might have two where you have an artistic director and a business manager. Sometimes in community associations, you might have a general manager, but it's that kind of that one senior executive role we're getting to, or the maybe two if it's even a bit more nuanced that way. Can you share those results? Yeah, there we go.
Yep, they're shared now.
So lots of folks that have a senior executive, maybe 2/3 of you, which one would think in an event like this that people would have something of this model in their head somewhere. No, sometimes they have multiple executives. So interested in what that means. Sometimes that is at you got shared leadership, and we'll talk a bit about that too. And then we don't. And there's a couple of questions even in the pre-questions or pre-submitting questions about what is it like to make a transition to this world. We can certainly talk through that. I've been on a number of organizations, and every day at Integrora, we work in planning and governance and legal and leadership with organizations, and we work with groups going through that transition, and that is a change, but it's not one you sort of necessarily do all at once. Thanks. We'll stop sharing that one, or is it shared? Then we can.
Yeah, it's stopped. You just have to exit out of it.
I got it. I'm going to start with this quote because this is one quote that I use. We use this quote quite often in a lot of our governance work, and this is from Stanford Social Innovation. Came out probably 3 years ago now. And this is a piece of work called The 4 Principles of Purpose-Driven Board Leadership. And to me, it's probably one of the more advanced theories of leadership, of governance leadership I've seen in the last few years. Really does sort of relocate the work of the organization with an equity mindset, with how we put purpose before organizations. So I think we can certainly tag that onto our resource list and send it out to you. But I love this opening quote, that boards are unique and curious leadership structure. I mean, that alone for nonprofits is almost enough. There's nothing quite like a nonprofit board. And it's the idea that you have a collection of people sort of put together with similar passions, but not necessarily fully aligned passions. The reason we join boards is quite different sometimes. You have different skill sets, different personalities. And you're in this thing called a collective. And boards have all the power in the world. Every legal thing, I'll give you a more technical definition of board leadership here in a second, but boards have all the authority. They have the authority and the responsibility to do what is best for the organization. And I think that's pretty well understood and common understanding of boards. But it's tricky because what it does, it brings up two different concepts here. In the first paragraph anyway, that they act only as a collective. And so when we start talking about things like this relationship between a single, or maybe in some rare cases, one or two senior executive, but largely a single executive and a collective, what does that look like? What's the reality of having one person relate to a group, and a group that may be in different stages of formation and may not be entirely a group, which is sometimes reality. So it's this idea of a collective, and what does it mean to relate to those folks, and how does a collective guide an individual? So those are one of the sort of the fundamental premises of this relationship. But it's the second part of the quote too that I think is quite interesting. The boards sit both atop and outside the organizational structure. And that's where boards should fit. They are governors. They sit outside it. But because they're outside it, they lose that connection to the ground. So we're left with this sort of conundrum sometimes where you have people who have all the authority and all the power in the organization. They may choose to delegate some of that away. But they have to make decisions based on what's best for the organization. How do you do that without that touching the ground type activity? And that's where you get into, I think, a lot of the problems with boards and CEOs is boards being wanting to do what's best in the organization, but maybe not being allowed to, or not having information, or not having the resources they need to do that. And CEOs being free to run with what an executing role might be. So how we balance some of these tensions, working as a collective, being a top and outside the organization, those are some of the fundamental pieces that probably frame some of this relationship, perhaps. I do want to talk, though, too, just about that. We'll get into a bit of theory, not a ton in this one, I don't think, today. But there is the theory. Every time we do anything in terms of teaching, we can give you the rules and the theory, and that's good stuff to know. And there's some things that are kind of really important and some things that are less important. But the reality of how these play out in our organizations have a million variables, right? You got the style, the structure, the history, the culture, even from the questions before, perhaps, about does it matter what industry I'm in? If I'm in arts, is it different than environment, than human services? It may well, right? So to take this with a bit of grain of salt is that what you might see on paper as the ideal that boards shall govern and staff shall sort of run things, that's not always true. And situationally it changes. There's times we can talk about when you go through transition, sometimes in an executive search, those two get a lot closer together and they maybe hopefully move away again. In times of crisis, sometimes they move closer or farther away. So take the theory, take what works for you. You know, there's not a ton of rules in this stuff, right? There are some best practices, but best practices can sort of be altered as you move forward, okay? I'd like you to maybe use the chat. Give me just, if you can, indulge me for a second. And in the chat, write one word. Just when you think about this relation, and where you start from. Maybe if you're starting as a board member, because some folks are board members on this and some are the senior executive. But give me one word that you think accurately, good or bad, describes the reality of the relationship between the board and their senior executive. One word that gives me that relationship in a really well thought out, cool word that I can read back to the group. So no pressure on this one at all. But give me that one word. Let's see what pops up here. There's too many. Here we go. Collaborative. Thank you, Jill. Complicated. There we go. Well, that just opens that door nicely to stuff. I would agree. Collaborative, complicated, collaborative again. Fluid. All right, go back to that one. That's a good one too. Collaborative, trust, supportive, misaligned. All right, tension, collaborative. So we're seeing a strong weighting towards collaborative. This would have been a good word poll one. We could have done that. And then some sort of other random ones that are probably a little more on the challenges of this. Fantastic. That's what, you know, again, it's going to change. Every organization is going to have something different for this. And even within organizations, it does change over time. It's one of the, you know, the structural pieces of having a relationship with the board and the CEO is the board oftentimes changes. So you have this always ongoing mix of new stuff that comes into the play. Thank you for that. Just a bit more of the technical definition stuff, and we'll get into some of the theory of the boards, the roles here. This is, you know, why boards get to do what they do. So the first definition was a bit more of a descriptive or maybe sort of emotive one on what boards do. This is from the Certified Professional Accountants of Canada. We use their materials quite a bit when we're talking about governance. It's Canadian, for one thing, which is really nice. It's usually very up to date, and it's got a lot of best practice. They're accountants, so there's lots of rules there, and they're good at that kind of stuff. But freely available, there's a whole series of materials, you know, 20 questions the board should ask about fiduciary duty, 20 questions about social enterprise, 20 questions about risk, and they're really well thought out, really well referenced materials. So if you're looking for good materials on just nonprofit risk management, governance stuff, the professional accountants candidates are really, really good to sort of draw from. Anything else we'll draw from is usually Alberta-based, but you don't tend to get a lot of this kind of relationship stuff in some of the more local content. So the board is responsible for all aspects of the organization. End of sentence. I mean, right there. You can then quote right there. Boards are the legal representative of the organization. Boards may be appointed or elected by members, but it is the board who is the legal authority. So they are the fiduciaries. They are to do what is best for the organization. So when we talk about this relationship, it is important to recognize that you have one that is the legal authority. This is the end of the buck stops with the board. So when we move from that, and there are ways to say it's not just an authoritarian or rule-based approach, but to recognize that's what underpins this. The boards do things. And one of the things they may do is hire an executive director or a CEO. And they may delegate to that person some of the authority of the organization. So This is the mechanism that boards often do, is we have the authority and the responsibility. We're going to delegate authority away. Debates upon whether you can actually delegate responsibility. I don't think you can. Responsibility tends to stay with the board. Authority can, in limited ways, be delegated to a CEO. And that's often done through things like policy. So I have a board policy that has a delegation authority to the CEO that tells me these are the things that Mike can do, and these are the things that Mike cannot do. So I can sort of manage the staff and run the operations and create budgets and do all those kind of good things. But, financial transactions about a certain amount, or, investing in some, Bolivian cryptocurrency that I had a good idea about, things like that I can't do because it's going to put the organization at risk. So boards do transfer some of this relationship. So that is, when we think about the relationship, part of it is the clarity of that. I think it's not enough for a healthy relationship, but it's a good foundational piece for me to have this piece, this document that says the board thinks this is what I should be doing and this is what they should be doing. So what it comes down to, a lot of these things, and that's not enough necessarily for role clarity, but it's a fantastic start to say, we understand the broad lanes that each of us is working within. Now, the devil kind of gets in the details and how we live that out and whether we both stay in those lanes. And probably one of the challenges of just having only that document or a set of documents that delegate power is we just can't anticipate enough. That we can sort of think about the big things like budgets and managing staff because they kind of happen on an ongoing basis. But a lot of the stuff that comes up is there's no roadmap for it. So it's how we navigate those gray areas that sometimes we get into trouble with. Boards are required to make decisions that are in the organization's best interest. Fair enough. I think that's a very standard duty of loyalty kind of piece. But it really is, is your loyal to the organization or to a CEO? And sometimes we'll see that in founder-driven ones where you have boards are saying, I'm here for the CEO, and that relationship is different if it's not fully about the organization. So we'll unpack that a bit as we move forward to day 2 here as well. In general, though, when we look at sort of the theory, and there's lots of good places, we've got some material up on the sort of basics of governance, and it's a free workshop again that's online right now if you want to take a refresher on that. But in generally, these are kind of the areas where the board is mandated to work within. Again, you have all the authority and control, it's all up to you. But if you're looking at a model that has a senior executive, the theory is sort of taken us in a couple different ways. One is that boards have 3 main areas. You can put more into this if you want. They set the direction. That's setting, refining the overall purpose, mission, and direction of the organization. There's a responsibility there, but it's probably more accurately a co-created kind of piece. And in the end, we've got some places where we can sort of chat a bit about what are the sort of areas where these things overlap. But in general, to ensure that there is a direction, the setting of it, the crafting of that direction may come from a more collaborative approach, but boards are mandated, or should, in terms of best practice, mandate's probably a little strong, the idea that you need to set the direction for the organization. So there is a direction. How that's carried out, that's a different question. There's the idea of oversight, and this is the fundamental duty of fiduciary duty of boards, is they oversee things. They make sure that we're taking care of the stewardship of the assets, monitoring activities, the health, the ethical behavior sometimes. So they do play that role, and that is, I think, and very well understood, and I think largely a pretty well thought out understanding of what a board does. It is an oversight role. Where this gets tricky is when does oversight become sort of involvement? And so when you think, yeah, I'm overseeing something, and maybe it's in the eye of the beholder. I think I'm overseeing something, and maybe the perception is, no, you're getting involved in the day-to-day or meddling. But that's maybe not about the activity itself. It may be more about the relationship. But in general, this is the role of the board. You need to oversight how to do the oversight stuff. And ensuring the resources for the organization, making sure we're well equipped to do what we want to do, that we have the people, the money, the pieces we need to carry out our mission. Again, you may not acquiring all those things, but it is the board's responsibility to make sure they are in place. And one of those resources are the people. One of those persons is going to be the executive that you have working for you. And when we talk about the relationship, that becomes a key resource, which is probably not the best way to put it sometimes, for the board, is you've got a high-skilled executive that you're able to entrust with some of the work that you're supposed to be doing as an organization. On the other side of the coin, we have the senior executive. And this can be, as we said, there's lots of terms for this. Liz sort of brought that up too. The idea this can be a executive director. This can perhaps be a CEO. Sometimes the incorporation, the act that you're incorporated under changes the terminology. So you probably see a few more CEOs in the Part 9 companies here in Alberta, which are nonprofit companies. Might see more executive directors, sometimes that terminology in societies, which where most nonprofits reside. But there's lots of variation in that too. And you're not necessarily locked into any one of those things. It really comes down to the style of your organization. But the senior executive, if you've got this board who's playing in this, what we call a policy governing board, where they're sort of in that pure governance role and not doing the work, they do the oversight, the resourcing, and the sort of direction setting. And the CEO does the execution, the executive director. So the planning, directing, implementing, aligned with that direction and aligned with those resources. So the setting direction, the executing the direction, and the informing piece. There's two other pieces. There's one other piece that's really important. And this speaks back to, I believe, the idea that boards sit atop and outside the organization. For a board to do its work, they need to have enough information, insight, and do enough sense making to be able to set appropriate direction. So boards that are so disconnected from organizations rarely make good decisions. And that's one of the things that I think that informing role is really important from the executive side. So whether that's through, I have a board meeting tonight, so they'll have a CEO report for myself, which really isn't a CEO report, it's more of an operational update because the entire staff sort of chip into it. I just throw my name on it, that kind of stuff. There we go. But the idea that how do they have enough information? But again, even as I'm writing those reports, I'm kind of thinking you're getting information on what I decide you need to get information on. So it is that if I'm asking you to be informed and have this broad-based approach to your decision making, I have a role in that. And so as we negotiate sort of what you need to do, what kind of informing you need, there's got to be a dialogue back and forth. So you're not just hearing what I want you to hear. Because if I give you select pieces of information, then the decision kind of heads along the path I want. And that is probably the crux of any challenge in this board CEO relationship thing is there was a sort of, I don't know if it's an adage, I'm not really sure what an adage is, but this is one. Either boards run roughshod over CEOs or CEOs run roughshod over boards, and which is perhaps true sometimes, but it doesn't speak to the power of this. This relationship, if it works well and when it works well, and it's going to go moving in out of this sort of zone sometimes, should be one of the most powerful sort of assets your organization has. So how do we find a way to make sure we're both staying within our lanes and bringing all we can to the table here? Oh, there we go. I'd like to hear from this then. Let's make this a conversation perhaps then. So I'd like to hear from you. And if you want to turn your camera on or put your hand up, I will try to see you. But what do you think makes for a good relationship between the board and a senior executive? Lots of wisdom in this group. Love to hear from you. So if you want to put your hand up, turn your mic on, just whatever it is, tell me, what do you think makes for a great relationship between the board and the senior executive? Yeah, there we go. Nice hand up. Way to go.
Clear communication.
Excellent. Good. Fantastic. And just a little bit more, how does that happen? Like how, I mean, especially these days, but I think communication is a funny thing, right? So it seems like it should be easy. So how does communication happen?
Well, in many different ways, because I think we have access to emails, we have access to phone, we have access to virtual, and we have access to in person. And so in our organization, we use all of those because our board is spread out around a area. They're not all in the same place. So we use all of those methods of communication, and we do our very best to make sure that if there's a question, it gets answered.
Yeah. Thank you. Fantastic. I saw a hand up and then it disappeared.
It was Jill, I believe.
Sorry, yes. I think trust and respect are also in there.
Mm-hmm. And how does one, it seems like it's straightforward, but how does one build such things, Jill?
I think through the communication.
Yeah.
Getting them to, especially when we bring on new board members, we kind of give an overview of all this not the main skills and attributes that board members are bringing to the organization, as well as my own as executive director, so that people can understand the wealth of knowledge and experience that we have around the table. There's a somewhat building of respect in that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Other thoughts? Trust and respect, clear for communications. Fantastic stuff here.
Yeah. In our chat, we have several people saying clear expectations.
Yeah, and that's a good one. And then to see, we'll talk a bit more about that, is how you set such things, because it is, what is clear to one person, maybe not the other, but how do you do them over time? Ross, some thoughts?
Sorry, I was having trouble with my headset there. Yeah, I think we're in a unique position where we're still a working board. We're trying to get to that executive director, you know, overseeing board. We're kind of in that transition. But I think where it works is where we've got everybody pitching into our strategic plan, everybody's voice being heard, and you're involving everybody, both staff and executives, so that you've got those alignments around, how you might get there. And maybe there's differing views and you work those out, but starting with that base plan of, are we all clear of where we're going over the next, 1 to 3 years, and what our goals and priorities are?
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of stage of life sometimes when you're at that working board level where you're all in it together still, and you're maybe starting to morph or grow to, we're now moving to maybe more the senior executive one. And there's some great advantages there, because you're all chipping in, you got stuff to do, and there is a much more, we're all in this together. I mean, that might have been your mindset, which is great. When you move to the more bigger standardized model of this sort of, we're still all in this together, but it's very different. Now we're acting in different ways, and I work for you, and you supervise me, and I'm accountable to things. That changes some dynamics. So yeah, as you move through the stage of life organization, certainly that changes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're in that tension. So we're starting, as we try to do this transition, we're getting into those tensions. So I think that's where we're working right now, actually, and trying to work through. We've got a workshop in March to kind of work through some of that stuff.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks, Ross. Great comments in the chat. Clear respect, the idea that our board is very active and creative and have ways to carefully not overwhelm the executive director. It's an interesting one too, is that sometimes you get boards that are so far away, you never get overwhelmed by them, like you haven't heard them between meetings. So I'd like to be overwhelmed some days. And sometimes you get 5 emails from, 5 different board members, and you think, I'd like to be less overwhelmed by my board. So it's hard to get that right. But how do you have that appropriate? But the idea that they're to support, which is one role of the board. One role of the board is to support the executive director. And what that looks like is going to play out differently in different times, different organizations. But it certainly is at the top of the list, I think, is to say, it's not just I'm here to direct you and oversee you. I'm actually here to support you in your role. And how often do board members ask, hey, how's it going? Like, I'm not here to meddle. I just want to know, how are you doing? It's tough, and it's oftentimes quite lonely running a nonprofit, as a lot of you folks know, is that you're in a very singular, solitary role, and you may have great staff around you. I have great staff. I have great people around me. Yes, Liz, it's you. Liz is one of our staff. She's great. Actually, she's the best of all my staff, I believe. So for the next 34 minutes anyway. So how do you sort of balance that? How do you have that relationship where it's personal and supportive and still professional as well? So thank you for that. Let's just sort of scroll this up a bit here, back to my screen, and let's talk about a few things. This is back to that Stanford article again, I believe. Yeah, it's the same article. And it sort of lays out one of the challenges of leadership in this role is that organizations are faced with 2 really problematic options. That the board gets sidelined for many strategic decisions. If we're not involved, we're not working in partnership, or we're not informed enough, the board tends to sit it out sometimes. And maybe you're rubber stamping decisions, or maybe you're kind of going through the motions of sort of wrestling with things. But that's quite common, that boards get shuffled to the background. We saw, I think, a lot of this during COVID. I think COVID was brutal on boards for a lot of reasons. We got very operational and very reactive very quickly. And so the management organizations became quite front and center for the first months of the pandemic. And then you went online and started to relate to people that way, and it became kind of even more problematic. And then the stresses of life built up, and it was hard to keep people involved. So I think COVID was a tough one. So not just because of COVID, but it is sometimes that boards can be very sidelined in decision making. They're not informed enough. They're supposed to be on top and outside the organization, but again, that leaves the dilemma. Other times, the other side of the coin is, the other end of the spectrum perhaps, is that decisions are made by an ill-informed board. So yeah, we're going to still make decisions. We're going to still make sure we're driving forward, except we might not be making good decisions. And it is one of the reasons that you have boards in nonprofits. You have community leadership. You have people who have a range of perspectives, a range of insights about the world around us, but generally aren't experts in what the nonprofit does. So you have this lay model of governance sometimes Doesn't mean there's not great skill sets there. And professional model of implementation. So how do you balance that where folks who have an idea of the market or their client needs or where the organized sector is going, and folks who have maybe more of a slightly different, more removed version of that. So neither of these probably is very sustainable. You don't want boards that are outside and not making decisions and sort of sitting it out when things change or not, you don't have the strength to draw upon. But nor do you want people making bad decisions. So how do we build this partnership? So a few thoughts on that, and I think none of these will probably be super things we haven't talked about yet. Some of the issues we've seen just in our work here. So when we do a lot of work one-on-one, either in governance or legal side or strategy with boards, and you see a lot of relationships. And sometimes you can see them coming. We were in a strategy session, I think last summer, and board meeting, a full day board and a full day strategy session. At the end of the first day, the executive director quit because of the tensions that arose, not just during our strategy stuff. I hope that wasn't our facilitation, but you saw that it came to a pinnacle. And to say, okay, there's something broken here, and that there's very much a lack of trust. The idea that I don't trust you to do your job. From the board side, perhaps a lack of trust going both ways. I don't trust you understand what we're doing or would support me. So again, that lack of trust and the idea of how do we actually work in our lanes, but trust each other to do so, which is, I think, super, super hard to do when you think about it. It's just not an easy thing to have this relationship between one and maybe 10 or a dozen people and say, this is a trusting relationship, because it implies that the board kind of has their act together as well. Now, poor working relationships, sometimes it's just purely the way the work done. Sometimes it's just the personality. Sometimes it's just not a click. I mean, you'll get that. I've had a number of board chairs here at Integral. I've had 4 or 5, and some you click with really well, and some you don't. And you work through it all because that's the nature of life. And you certainly don't get to pick who your co-workers, your boss are a lot of times. But you got to be able to sort of navigate that and know that sometimes in all our relationships, is that some just fire better than others. And sometimes in times in life, sometimes sort of ebb and flow. So how do you work with that when you don't necessarily click with somebody? A lot of misaligned expectations. I think that popped up in our chat there too. Clear roles, expectations about, do we have realistic expectations what we're going? Do we have expectations what the CEO's job isn't doing that, what the board's job isn't doing that? And a lot of this comes down to pure sort of basic planning stuff. Are we setting organizational goals on an annual basis? Within those organizational goals, does the board know where it's going? Has it sort of set its goals for the year? Has the CEO, largely in conjunction with the board, set their goals? But if only one of those groups or none of those groups are setting goals for the year, then what's performance based on? Is it just the scorecard of sort of standard nonprofit stuff? Is you brought in Monday and you got bigger numbers in your annual report than last year, or you're slightly bigger than last year? Those aren't probably the best metrics sometimes. They're the ones we tend to fall into, but do you really have those rich conversations at the start of the year to say, I expect this of each other, and it's a mutual conversation? So those are things I think we can probably do more of. Probably need more structure and more time invested in this. I think there's times we don't invest in this understanding of roles, understanding of who we are and how we're going to do things, which is both an expectation and a role, and again, back to the trust piece as well. And one of the biggest challenges I think we see is this challenge of utilizing skills of board members in an appropriate way. So this is one where you often comes sort of framed as, well, board members are stepping into an operational role. So, if I have somebody on my board who's got an HR background and I have an HR issue, is there a role for that board member? Absolutely there is. It's not that, the board members only govern and don't talk about these sometimes really challenging operational issues. But the best way to do that, we find is, I think the theory would say, is it's got to be driven by the executive. So it's not the board sort of looking down from on high saying, I see you got some HR issues there. Let me come down and fix those for you because I'm good at this stuff. You may well be good at this stuff, but the idea is it should be driven from the bottom up. From me saying, listen, I've got some HR issues or beyond, I need some help with this. I know you've got some experience. Can we have a conversation about that? That's a role where the board member is using their expertise, I think, in an appropriate way. They're still wearing a board hat, so they haven't sort of taken that off completely. But at least we define the parameters a bit. I'm not having an answer foisted upon me. I'm coming to you for your expertise and wisdom. Makes it work a lot better. The problem is we don't always have those roles as CEO. I don't have, 8 or 9 different questions to ask my 8 or 9 board members. So how do I find ways for boards to operate as a board that gives them something meaningful to do and something valuable to do and something aligned with our work? So in some of our sessions, we'll talk about theory of leadership or theory of governance called governance is leadership, where we evolve the board beyond the fiduciary duties of oversight to strategy and those generative and the sense-making questions about where we're going, which puts the board in a whole different way of working. It puts the board in that co-creating partner with an executive to say, we know we're here, we need to go here in the future, and we've got a different way of doing things than simply reading financial statements or board reports or performance reviews. So it elevates the work of the board. If you can get to that, we'll touch on a bit more of that in a minute here, but that's probably a better partnership model than the traditional stay in your lane, I'll do my job oversight versus employee. So what should boards expect from the senior executive? Again, this is stuff that I think there are expectations, and we talk about clear expectations. How you do these, how clear these are, will vary depending on who you are, what organization you're with, or how you do your work. It depends on the situation your organization is dealing with. If one were in crisis, I think the expectations are probably a little more well-defined and probably a little more poignant. So if you're facing bankruptcy, I think the decisions and the way you might work with a senior executive is quite different than if all is well and everything is perfect in a nonprofit. I've yet to see such a nonprofit, but I'm sure there are some of them out there where things are never like bubbling away. So the things that I think the board should expect from the senior executive to be kept informed, to make sure there's, I think there's a general rule is no surprises. That the worst thing you do as a CEO is to say, here's something that's been bubbling for 6 months and now I bring it to your attention. I think it sort of sets the tone for a conversation. The first question I would have as a board member is saying, why didn't I know about this earlier? I mean, I think there's things we could have brought to the equation. There's things that we could have added to help mitigate this or maybe alleviate the problem. So bringing questions and thoughts and issues before they're big questions and thoughts and issues. And again, that goes back to trust. Do I trust that if I bring you to the board something that maybe doesn't reflect well in the organization or doesn't necessarily reflect well in my own performance, to say, can I bring this to you and say, yeah, this is this scenario where we need some help and I need your help to do this. So, or even in good things. I mean, it doesn't have to be a crisis either. It can be, I was in a board meeting once and somebody brought up the fact that we just got a $500,000 grant for something. I thought, I'm not even sure we were moving to that area. And so you sort of think there are ways that you don't want to surprise the board and moving forward or anything like that, make sure they're well informed so that you're both able to do your job. But really, I think the heart of it is so they can do their job. Boards cannot do anything unless they have enough information, enough insight to work with stuff. The board should be, the boards they should expect they're treated as a collection of equals. And it is, I think this is when I got a graphic, I think Liz did up for us here in a second, is this the problematic nature of what it means for a single person, me, to relate to a group. So I'm working for a committee, more or less. I have a number of people who are going to direct my work. So sometimes that works really well and sometimes that doesn't. But they're a group of equals. No one on a board has any more power. So how do I have that relationship with this group of equals? How do I treat them the same? Or equally, not the same necessarily. It's probably a better way of putting it. So they are trying to wrestle with this idea of a collective, and I'm trying to work with them as a group of equals that way. That they should be expected to be supported in their decision making. So one of that reason we started with that decision, that sort of definition of what a board is that the legal authority is, there's times when I may not agree with my board. And to say they've decided to go a certain direction, and that's we've had conversations and hopefully we've had good sort of generative, discussions back and forth. But if they go a direction, that is the direction. That is the direction of the organization. This isn't me grumbling about saying, and we haven't had any of these at Integral that I'm aware of anyway. But I've been on around boards where you say the CEO thinks we're going this way and the board thinks we're going this way. Well, at the end of the day, the board's going this way. And it is the reality too that staff are temporary. And I'm not saying that's the solution to take on this one, but to say there does need to be that respect. So when we talk about working for a group that has all the legal authority and responsibility, then we need to certainly acknowledge that when things don't go our way, that is the group that has such authority. I think boards need to be supported in their own development. So it's part of my role to help my board be developed. And so we help them with information, we help them with governance training, we help them with team building stuff. That's stuff we do a lot down here in Integral with organizations. But how do you bring some of those skills to the board? It's still their responsibility though. So it's still the board's responsibility to take care of their own house. So the idea of board self-governance is a key concept in board development. I think sometimes an underdeveloped area of boards is that we take care of our own teamwork, our own recruitment, our own onboarding, all those things. My jobs are to support that. is their duty to take their own house and me to help that out. But honesty, open and candor and respect. I think it comes down to any relationship, and you'll see that those words on both sides of the equation here is that if we're not able to have conversations and generative conversations, and that does take time. It takes time to build that relationship, to go back and forth with that openness, that candor, that inquisitive, that sort of let's brainstorm some things together without being too locked in. Not on every issue. I don't need the board to brainstorm with me, the type of photocopier, paper to buy, that kind of stuff. But on issues that matter, we need to build that relationship that has some of those really generative type dynamics in a way that's healthy and ongoing and respectful. On the other side, there is what should the executives, the senior executive, yeah, that's what they should expect from me. This is what we should expect from them. So to speak with one voice. So if you do sort of basic governance training, you'll see the concept that boards speak with one voice. And that comes from the idea legally that the board is an entity, a singular entity that has a voice. Within a board, you may have lots of voices. So when we talk about the idea of speaking with one voice, we would say that around a board table, boards should have a whole bunch of opinions. They should wrestle with things. You may be able to, fight it out tooth and nail and not be aligned. But once you leave that board table, there is one voice. So the idea of consensus being that all voices are in the mix, and out of that mix comes one singular voice. So it's not like we all agree. It's not like there is no other opinions. And why it's really important is there's sort of two lanes that's important. Is one is the external role of the board and the organization outside. You don't want perception that you have the board, half the board thinks this and half the board thinks that. We're going different directions. But really important in that board CEO relationship, that's probably the most important place where this comes out, is that I have one trusted voice from my board that I need to follow. It's not I'm discerning from 8 or 10 or whatever number of board members are, that I've got to pick up the nuance of what the real threat is. So that idea of one clear, consistent, well thought out voice or direction from a board is super important, I think, from the board's perspective. Again, the board, I should expect that the board is taking care of their own house, that they are developing that culture of being an effective board. We spend a lot of time down here with the staff, trying to be a good staff team, to figure out who we are and what skills we have and what we need to learn and how we each bring part of ourselves to this work. I think it's fair enough to say I expect the board to be going through the same. Now, I think most boards don't go through that. It's you don't have the time or the desire to do that, but boards do need to attend to who they are as a collective, not just in the decision making, but as a team, as a group that works together that way. I do expect to be supported, much as I'm expected to be supported in the decisions of the board. There is an expectation too that they support management decisions, and that once we made them, they're well thought out. And if there's performance issues, that's a separate thing. But if we're going a route, that we are going this route. So the idea that we do this as a partnership. To set clear and attainable performance expectations for sure. So what am I here to do? I mean, what are my goals? What am I expected to perform to? It's not just a made up thing, that they're clear. And if there is a review or some sort of judgment of somebody's performance, we know what we're judging again. And again, honestly, the candor, the honestly, I'm not sure why that's there. There we go. Okay, you're no longer the favorite staff person, Liz. So honestly, candor and respect. We should be working at that as well. One of the things that I think is a bit of a challenge here is we have so overall just this, I guess, basically some basic fundamentals, sort of sum this part up, is that what makes for a really good partnership, and I think you've named some of these already, certainly, that commonly understanding of the vision and direction of the organization. So at what level or how clear that is going to be dependent on the organization. But some organizations may say, go fulfill the mission, and off you go and everything you do to do that. I don't think that's probably enough. It's that how are we going to get to where we're going? So if we're here today at this point today, and we want to get to point B in the future, which is basically what strat planning is that do we have an understanding of not just where we are today, but where we're going in the future? Is that commonly understand? And is there enough understanding on the concepts from the board of saying how we're going to get there? They don't have to dictate everything about how we're going to get there, but they should have enough understanding that we know we're going to pull this way. So for us on financial management, they know, hey, we're going to lean into about 40% on earned revenue, 20% here, 20% there. We know the lanes. We've got that common understanding. I think at a level that's both clear enough for everybody to know what's going on, but also a way to figure out how to participate freely. There's times when boards need to support that directional piece. Candor and culture of trust for sure. We can, I think anything that can build that takes time. And I'll talk about why that's challenging in a minute here. Clear, relevant, and regular communication between the board and chair, because sometimes that it's hard to have that conversation. So a lot of times I find that my planning work happens with the chair, and we sort of co-create or sort of brainstorm together, which has got a really good thing because you build that partnership really powerfully, I think, at that level. But it's hard to translate that to a whole board. So then how do I not just sort of get farther ahead than I should with my chair or he with me? And how do we make sure we're bringing the board along in that? So there's a bit of part where it's more expedient to work one-on-one. There's a role certainly between the board chair and the CEO, but it can't replace that overall board relationship. So a bit of balancing that and making sure we're not getting so far down the road that way. Sharing information and creating an environment for sense making. So it's not just information that needs to be shared. And this is very much a two-way street. It's the idea of how to do sense making, how to take information and say, what does this mean for us? And so right now, I think you'll see this is a time of year, January, February, tons of sort of state of the sector type reports out there. I know CCVO did theirs last week, I believe, last week. Magin's got one out, Charity Village has one out. They're everywhere. So this is the time of year people put up reports. I find those are fantastic sort of joint sense-making material for boards to say, it's not so much about our programs necessarily, but if the sector is saying, yeah, workforce issues and staff burnout and mental health supports are a concern, what does that mean for us internally? What are we doing about that? That should twig a question the board saying, Mike, we're seeing that, staff burnout at about 50% level in the nonprofit sector. Is that happening for you folks? What are you doing to mitigate that? What are you doing to make sure it doesn't happen? Those are nice joint sense-making pieces to do because there are things that are important to us. They're not, I think, operational because you're sort of drawing from larger data sets, but trying to make that relevance, that sense-making. Same thing in sort of future planning, saying, boy, got a government in Alberta that's maybe going to not fund really fully for the next 26 years until we have a savings. I'm not sure how long it's going to take. Sure, it'll be fine. But for now, look at that and go, okay, if nonprofits are going to be likely status quo for 26 years, not quite, I don't think it'll last that long, but still, that tells me that something in my work, I need to do some sense making. Does that change my model? So those are great opportunities to sort of not just take a bit of information, have a conversation, doesn't get too operational, keeps at the strategy level, and allows us to sort of build not just the relationship, but firm up that sense of where we're going as well. And then both parties should have the expectation that we're going to maximize our performance. It is fair for the board to say, Mike, you need to be a great CEO, and not an ego thing to say, the expectation is, my expectation, I'm going to have the best board in this sector. Their expectation is they have the best CEO of the sector. It's not a competitive thing. It's just saying that is the standard of what other expectation would I have? Do I want to expect my board is the 18th best board in this sector? Well, probably live with that, I suppose, but why not? So my expectation is we should be great at what we do, and they should expect that from me as well, knowing that there is, probably some give and take and some ups and downs in the way we live life here. What's next here? So this is, it's animated. That's why. This is reality. There you're back to being the number one staff person. It's great. In theory, this is how the relationship works, is you've got one singular CEO on the blue dot there, and you've got this group of 6 people on this board, which is, that is the nature of a single person working with a collective. And that has its own sort of ups and downs. The power of it, you got the plurality and the perspective and the different views within the board that I think can really make that a rich understanding. But it's also tricky. It's tough for me to relate to 6 or 10 people at a time. So how do I build that out? Because you're not really a collective. And a lot of times what we get is a model that works like that. Oh, sorry. The animation was just too complex to run. That I don't really get this reality because the collective's not there. The collective is, there are 4 or 5 board members who are really involved. There's one we haven't seen for 2 months or so, or 6 months or so, and you kind of, where's Joe, I wonder? Is he still on the board? So how do I relate to a collective that isn't fully a collective? So we were using that quote, that opening quote, that boards only work as a collective. And I tend to frame that around the power and the brilliance of being a nonprofit board. But one of the comments we got the other day from a board member is saying, yeah, but what it also points out to, when you have one weak link in a chain, how weak the collective gets. And you're no longer a collective if you're not really all within that bubble. There's times we can sort of navigate people being outside the little circle here quite a bit. But if this is the reality that you're not actually acting a collective, I'm not actually engaging with you as a collective now. I'm sort of maybe ignoring some of you, maybe not seeing some of you, maybe reaching out across your role as a board member to you. So it does go back to the idea. I think it's one of the big things for board is we've got to attend to our own health. We got to make sure we actually are working as a collective, which is a really hard thing to do. I envision this or sort of frame this as it's like this weird three-legged race, except you got 10 people tied at the ankles and you got to go somewhere. And you've also, in this case, got to lead one other person. So in this metaphor, I guess. And that's a hard thing to do. So that idea of how to work as a collective forms so much of this type of relationship. Just a few areas where, there is confusion or responsibility. And I think when you start to think through this, there's sort of general ones. We can talk about the big buckets, the big lanes where boards should operate and where staff should operate. Very much depending on the organization, the style, structure, the stage of life. But reality, I think moving beyond sort of the basic, it is a transactional relationship where I work for you and we implement things, to this more meaningful, we're co-creating together relationship. We get into the idea of shared leadership. And shared leadership has a lot of ways of sort of framing what this is. It's where you distribute leadership across an organization in different ways, but you have this sort of co-leading way. We're not just leading the organization, we're leading each other. The definition I used in one of my papers years ago was that it is the idea that my success depends on your success. Is that I can't be successful as a CEO unless you're successful as a board. You can't be successful as a board and your collective governing board unless I'm successful. So this idea that's mutuality, that we cannot but move forward together. Still recognizing too, there's lots of things that go into that. There's circumstances, there's a power dynamic, there's an employee-employer relationship. But the heart of this, when we talk about where I think the ideal is about shared leadership. And it doesn't mean we all do things together. That means that we share everything. So I think there's still clearly defined roles here, but to understand the leadership of an organization is very much a shared concept. So a few areas is where we talk about what sharing looks like here. Just going to pull out a few things. So when I think about even our own work and the work that we do, and this is some stuff that BoardSource put out last year. BoardSource is American, and this kind of stuff is pretty good. So you're not getting into regulatory stuff or anything that's going to have terms that throw you off. So BoardSource, a fantastic practice and theory and a lot of tools on BoardSource out of the States, but really a lot of open stuff there too. So board meetings, like who does the board meeting stuff? And this varies from every board I've either been on or supported. It varies. There's a lot of times where staff are super involved in the board meetings. Ideally, boards are, this is part of their work. It is, you're running your meetings, you're trying to be a collective. The staff's role is support there. So, in theory, you should have the boards chairing those meetings, running them. They should be sort of taking care of their own structures and processes that way. I think there's a shared understanding of the development of the meeting, like the agenda of the meeting. So a lot of things we'll have on our agendas are things like the board needs to attend to, sort of the minutes and those kind of things, but their own development, their own recruiting and that kind of stuff. I'm there to support them and making sure they have the information. They know what's happening operationally. We've got some financial reports or some program reports, and there's a dialogue about those things. So that's very much a shared thing. Though there's pieces that fall into both our worlds this way. So what this looks like in every board, it depends on who you are and what you do, depends on your style, depends on your capacity. Some boards lean a lot on staff to their board meetings, sometimes too much. So, very much a shared one. Give you one more example before we sort of bring it to a close here and take any questions you might have. Budget and finances, I think another great sharing one. The idea that sometimes this is delegated almost entirely to the board. Sometimes it sits with the staff person. Over on the board side, it does fall into that big thing. So that oversight role and the resource, having resources role, that's the main role of the board. So making sure you have adequate resources, you protect the assets, great fiduciary role. Financial oversight, do you have the controls, the processes, and the systems? Do you have a bookkeeper? You tracking things down? Are you making sure things documented according to best practices? Ongoing work, ever ongoing work. I don't think we're ever quite always there on systems and controls that way. To review and approve the budget. So a lot of times the budget's not approved by a board. My board probably couldn't write the budget because they don't have enough information. But they need to understand it and review it and approve it. They are going to, that is very much a board document when you approve a budget. And then overseeing the audit, and that does tend to come out of the more regulatory side of things, that boards or members approve the auditor. Kind of a funny old concept. I'm not sure why we still do that, but the board does have a role in that. The shared stuff is we're still mutually responsible to oversee the fiscal stewardship of things. We have a treasurer on our board. We have a bookkeeper, so we have that shared responsibility. And for me, it's to make sure they're supported. We've got budgets that are clear. We do the day-to-day management. We're following the policies. We're making sure that we're bringing up any issues that arise along the way. So there are some things that get shared. These ones are pretty clear. There's other ones that are probably a little grayer. So public relations, sometimes that's probably a little more nuanced in the organization. Sometimes that's held all in-house. Sometimes there's good reason to use board members in that. I think strategy development is another shared one they can use. Sometimes you need the expertise of the staff to sort of inform that, with the guidance of the board to make sure we go in the right direction. Government relations is one where they're shared, I think, a lot of times, because the voices of boards have a different weight within governments than perhaps a staff person do. So wherever it fits with you, there's lots of ones that are shared. There's more materials. We'll pass this article on as well. But I do want to leave a minute or two for some questions at the end here. If there's anything that's, policy and planning, don't worry about that. No one does policy and planning. So just a couple things here. Just some great resources for you on this kind of stuff. Imagine Canada, there's I'll give you credit for the standards program. The nice thing with the standards program, you don't have to go through accreditation. There's all kinds of great governance resources to sort of tune up, and some HR ones that might play into this too. So you can go through all the materials without having to pay for the accreditation. Accreditation is still a good thing, so I'm not trying to dissuade you, but some nice sort of step-by-step guidance stuff. The Alberta Board of Government program, we sort of recommend them quite often. Alberta-based stuff, always pretty modern, probably could use a little updating. So some great resources that way out of the Alberta Community Development Unit's website. Again, the Chartered Professional Accounts of Canada, fantastic materials, really up to date, really clear, really easily accessible. And then Board Source on the sort of tools and resources, but again, American, so don't get into any regulatory stuff there. But just in the last minute or two, anything question-wise that jump out for you? Anything you'd like me to say more or delve into, or anything that came to mind here that you might want to throw in the mix before we let you go?
I might summarize kind of a question that I think a lot of folks are wondering about. I think it's clear that there's obviously has to be some sort of definition of roles, but how does that come out in practice? I think probably a lot of EDs and a lot of boards are dealing with old relationships, and that's operated however they have. How would you go about redefining or more clearly defining when they're not a newly onboarded person?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you can sort of develop with the basic stuff. So a lot of boards would have the role of the board. This is what a board member does. They'll have this is the role of their job description or delegation to a senior. So in some ways you have some of those, but it's first thing is making sure those are actually relevant and clear and up to date. So a lot of times you have board policies or some of these descriptions, and they don't really reflect what we do. So if I had to look at my job description, it's 5 years old. I probably couldn't tell you what's in it. Probably should be able to do that. I don't, but I probably need to update that to say, okay, is this really reflective of what we do? So if we have these things, we've written things down, are they really accurate? That's the first thing. I think they realize that that's not going to take you as far as you want, though, because it's the grayness and the stuff in the details, or the how we enact those roles is probably more important than what we do. So when I meet with my board, it's the idea that one of the questions will come up is, what do I expect from the board? So I think that question, expectations, I put some thoughts down both sides, but what do we really expect from each other? So those two things, up-to-date, clear responsibilities, the question expectations is there. And then just maybe what to do when it goes south. How shall we handle when we have conflicts? If I think, do you think I'm wandering too far for it? What's the board going to do with that? Not an individual board member, but what's the board as a whole going to do with that? If I feel you're sort of getting too much into the weeds, how do I deal with that? Do I have to deal with that as an individual with that one board member, or do I bring that to the entire board? And the reality is that it's the latter, because the board's job is self-police themselves, not my job to police the board. It doesn't tend to work that way, I think, sometimes, but there is that role of the board to say they need to hold each other accountable to act this way, not just holding me accountable. So I think there's some conversations, some clarity, and that kind of stuff to throw in the mix. Yeah.
Great. Should we use the last minute? You want to?
Let's use it. If we got it, let's use the last minute.
Right. Let's do Oh, how might you approach your board to be a giving board? Maybe it's renegotiating, yeah, that sort of expectation. Um, yeah, getting a board to be a giving board, or at least how to see if they can leverage the relationship to open the doors for funding.
So
How
giving
about
money.
that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buck off. Yeah. So yeah, that's to me, it's an expectation one. I mean, if you would, there's all kinds of theory on boards. You know, should boards should each board member making a contribution to the organization that's meaningful to them? That's on some boards. You have that. Depends on the style of the organization. There's some boards that almost do no fundraising. They don't have that role in fundraising. We don't have fundraising in Integra Board. We got $100 through fundraising in 5 years, so I don't have that expectation. But so I think there is, but it comes back to what is the expectation of being on this board, whether that's a written policy. But if it's the CEO thinks, I think you should be all be giving or opening doors, and the board hasn't ever had that conversation or set that expectation, then you're mismatched. You're not seeing it the same way. So I think it's about expectations. It is, and to know that up front. If I'm going to join a board, there's an expectation that I'm using my connections to leverage money. That you're not surprising people with that. So you can't just sort of do the bait and switch for saying, yeah, you're here to be a governing board, but really you're here to raise millions of dollars. Probably good to have that conversation up front. So clarify expectations is seems to be my answer right now.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right, let's go and wrap this up then. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'll be emailing out the recording as long as along with the feedback survey here. I've dropped that in the chat. It only takes a couple minutes, and because today's session was a new one, we would really be interested in hearing your feedback on it. And we really do build our offerings based on things that come up in these surveys. So I appreciate your time and effort there. And for the next slide, what's that next slide? Yes, so we are a capacity builder and nonprofit ourselves. So our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and support so that you can do the best work that you do. So feel free to reach out to us if you need support in any of these sort of core areas. And if we can't directly help you, we're happy to point you in the right direction as well. Yeah, and that's all we really have today. I'd like to thank everyone just for their participation and their attention. And if we want to stick around, we can do that for a few minutes too.
Thanks, folks. Thanks for being here. Again, reach out, any questions. Always like to have conversations. So there's stuff that sparks a question in your mind, reach out, give us a call. Always good to chat. Okay.